Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Lefkowitz, and I'm here with Steve Wilson and Lisa Bobbitt. And we are going to do a session about privacy and data and digital trust and the future. So hold your chairs, 45 minutes. We're going to try to get that all done. To begin, I'm so fortunate to be joined by Steve and Lisa. Steve is Citrix's Vice President of Product for Cloud and IoT. His products include Cloud, Workspace, and our analytics designed for all of those products. Steve, I won't read you his whole resume, but Steve has an incredible resume going back through many years at SYN and at Oracle in senior leadership positions. So thank you for being here, Steve.
Thanks, Peter.
And we have Lisa Bobbitt. Lisa is Cisco's privacy engineering architect. And I'm just going to read to you from Lisa's job mission, because it's an ambitious one and it's an exciting one. Lisa's job is to embed data privacy and security controls into Cisco's processes, applications, and offerings. That's quite a little thing to do. Little thing to do. The really truly interesting part about Lisa, which we'll get into in a little bit, is that Lisa, along with Jonathan Fox at Cisco, manages a really sophisticated program around privacy engineering. And for those of you who in your spare time have ever read the Privacy Engineers Manifesto, that is sort of the Bible of the space and something that the privacy team at Cisco manages. So thank you.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is I would like to hand the very important clicker over to Steve and let Steve talk about data at Citrix. But I'm going to frame it first. We live in a world now where 10 years ago, nobody ever could have imagined that our products would be so not just data-centric, but metadata-centric. There was increasing amounts of data in everything that we did. What we didn't quite get at the time was all of the benefits and all of the risks that would be associated with data about data. What it is that you do when you access something, when you authenticate against a system, when you travel around a system, when you come in from the internet and go out to the internet, what it could tell about you, what you're doing, what health conditions you have, what risks you pose. And with that comes a series of very important decisions. Steve and Lisa are uniquely positioned to talk about what our two companies are doing in the space. And then once we've gone a bit through what the two companies are doing in this area, we'll talk a little bit about the law. We'll talk a little bit about what's to come, some of the risks, some of the challenges, and what we're all doing to try to get on top of that. So, Steve, I hand you the mantle.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about this. And I think, fortunately, the keynote this morning set me up pretty well. So hopefully everybody got to see that. But I think what you're seeing is, from a corporate strategy, more and more of what we're doing at Citrix pivots around the ability to manipulate big data sets and do advanced analytics on them. And really, we started down this road in a lot of ways less than 3 years ago. And we took a look at the trends that were going out there, seeing the early signs that analytics and AI were becoming much more central to what people were doing. And we thought about what that might mean to us, right? We're not going to become an analytics vendor and go compete with Power BI from Microsoft and Tableau. And we weren't going to become an artificial intelligence vendor and sell you neural networks because people like Amazon and Microsoft are doing that. But we thought there was really a unique play given the amount of data that our products generate. And really what this led to is us looking at this where we said there are these emerging AI machine learning platforms where we can actually use this to do what we call understanding the work graph. What are people doing? Where are they doing it from? Why are they doing it? And this brings us to the idea of context and really bringing greater context to what's going on, which we can use in a whole lot of different types of applications. One of the big applications is computer security. You know, the big things people worry about when you start to house these big repositories of data is what if somebody gets it? Turns out one of the first things that you figure out how to use this technology for is how to better protect your data. And I was working with a customer, relatively small Citrix customer, set of auto dealerships, few hundred employees, but they depend heavily on Citrix for their whole environment. But they had actually a set of other security technologies they had. They had a commercial firewall, a commercial antivirus package, and the guy I was talking to told me he got 300 emails a day from his firewall. Which probably most of which were some actual attempt of somebody to probe his perimeter and decide whether they could attack him and steal all of his data and his customers' data. But it actually had reached the point where it was completely inactionable to him because the firewall was too dumb to understand the context. And if you remember the slides Calvin put up this morning with, you know, the big scary teeth, and how do you know the difference between the big scary teeth and the cute puppy? Well, it's more context. But you have to be smart to be able to look across that and take advantage of the bigger data sets. So when you look at this from a security perspective, it's if people are going to get more sophisticated at attacking us, and that's going to include things like your traditional banging against the firewall in a very William Gibson-esque hacker scenario, all the way to the more let's call them mundane, but maybe more insidious types of user-centric hacking that goes on there with social engineering and trying to get people's credentials. You need more sophisticated ways to handle those things. And so the first application that we built on our big data platform was user behavior analytics. And we didn't build our platform as a security platform. We built it as an analytics platform. Just the first set of analytics we decided to do was to help protect everybody's data. And so you look at all of those inputs that we have on the left side of the screen. Most of those have been there for years, if not decades, from Citrix. We just mostly dropped that data on the floor, and now we're trying to help you make better use out of it. But in essence, we can do better risk metering and help you decide what potentially real threats are. On the flip side of this from security is about productivity, and it's about what we talked about this morning, where people have too many apps, they don't get the use out of them, they're not getting their money's worth, and it's frankly just too complicated and bogging everybody under it. So when we look at things like, again, AI and big data, how do we get to a point where I can leverage those to just get much more, call it intimate with my infrastructure? Why do I have to go open up a bunch of old web applications and dig around in HTML apps? Why can't I just ask for what I need and get what I need and tell something to do what I need to get done? And so these are the promises of these technologies that we're really going after as a company. And I think you're
it's mine. As Peter says, I'm the privacy architect at Cisco, and our focus has been in the sense of where we fit into the world. We have moved data for years and years and years. My whole career at Cisco, I thought data was in the packet. You know, it's something I moved from left to right, and I spent a lot of energy in that space. But as I got into security, we really started focusing on how do you secure it. And, you know, again, during that period, we looked at firewalls and we looked at application security. But what we've really learned in this new world is that it's really two pieces of the security that we focus on with data. One is that it's data-driven, it's data-centric. And number two, that it's people-centric, because it now brings the data and the people together because of the things that Steve was just talking about. You're trying to make work happen. You're trying to make, you know, in the commercial area, in the consumer area, you're trying to entertain yourself or educate yourself. But it's always between a person and the data. All of the stuff that we can get that is the context of that helps us make that better. One of the things about it is that with that connectivity, a lot of data in the past that has been siloed is no longer siloed. It was physically siloed, so I couldn't go and get Peter's data because there was no connectivity between him and myself. But now, I have that. I have data generated from every part of my life, be it the house. You know, my husband has me, we've got cameras everywhere, from the car, from my school, from work, from the community, the cameras along the road, and now with the car it's talking to me too. You know, we've got all these things moving forward. The benefits we see are just amazingly across the board for us, you know, exciting, and we know that it's coming, but we got to protect it. Because at the end game, this is to make us better, it's not to make the information better. We're really applying it so that communities and people will be better as they go forward. Make sure I can see this, there we go. So Cisco, like Citrix, has really been focusing on all this data that we get, not only the content, the value of that data, but the context of that data. And we've applied it somewhat the same ways. We've applied it in our collaboration with our cognitive work. We've applied it in our data centers, in our networks, how to build a better network by looking at what's going on. We've applied it in the environments that are security. And that, as you said, was your first thing. For us, it was the very first area that we really brought data together and said, oh, we can see more, and we can actually let people know without giving away strategic data or personal data. We can let you know someone's attacking in this area, and this is what the attack vector looks like. And now I can share that, and you can put up a remediation before it happens to you. So that being predictive was really important to us. So we've worked on that. And then the fourth piece of this, where we're really focusing on AI and ML, is that running our own business. You know, how do we hire the right people for the new future? How do we work with really good marketing and sales? And then how do I make sure that we are doing the right things for our employees and for our customers as we go forward? So it's an interesting time for us data-wise. And I was telling Peter earlier, because I've been at Cisco a very long time, 24 years, that when we started, data, we weren't the processor. But as we've moved into cloud and we've moved into IoT, you know, we are the processor now. And it's important to us to make sure we're doing the right thing for this data. And that's where my world lives, as Peter was talking about. We're very focused that we need to support this environment. We don't want to slow down anything. We don't want to be the we don't want to be the cops, but we want to make sure that the data that we're using has really 4 pieces that are important to us. One of those is that it's quality, that the data you've got has been updated, and that you're not, as my previous boss said, that you're not hoarding data that you no longer need. 73% of the data out there today is no longer valuable to a company or to regulations that people are storing. And the reason they're doing it is storage is not that expensive anymore. But if you start doing AI and ML on old data, you're going to get an old decision. The next piece of it for us is that protection. And our protection has to be broken apart both for what Cisco does, but again, what our customers are doing. And we spend a lot of time with our, accessibility to things, our, encryption of work, but it is growing and going faster and faster. So we spend a lot of energy both across our board, but the group I'm in spends a lot of time building common modules so that we can actually put it across all our products, not just security products, but product security. And that's why I chose, when I read Michelle's book and Jonathan's book, I read it over Christmas one year. My husband worked Christmas, we can't help that. And I went, this is why I'm in this space. I really truly believe that we have to, as people, be protecting ourselves, but taking advantage of all these opportunities. So it's not that I won't share my data, but share it for value. Don't just give it away. And so that's where my privacy piece comes in, that we really focus on the regulations, but we also look at the real value of taking care of people. And that, I don't want you to say no, but I want to be able to be very transparent about why I need the data that I'm asking you to give me. So that transparency has been a big piece of our story of really focusing on that area and making sure that we're not just saying, here, give me the data, let me hide it from you. And we do need that, not just the content, but the context, where it is, who's touching it, how long should we keep it. All of those things become part of my engineering that I teach to my engineers, I teach to our salespeople. we really spend a lot of time with awareness, because the first step for you to think about data is what's in your head, not what I code. So that's really where we are. I think this one's yours, Peter.
So before we get to all the scary laws, let's talk a bit about how this works in practice. And Lisa, I'll start with you. I know that you guys have built a really strong routine around how engineers think about these issues when developing products and when implementing products. Could you just walk us through a little bit of that life cycle and where ownership lies for that? Do you view this, I'll put it this way, you think about this community, which is largely technical people, mm-hmm. Do you view the ownership and the responsibility for these topics principally as residing with wonky policy guys like me?
No.
Or in engineering? Who owns it?
Actually, the teams that build our products own that opportunity. What our team focuses on as part of operations is to give them a framework that we can be consistent across things. So 12 years ago, Cisco looked at what Microsoft was doing and put in our secure development lifecycle. And so we started building in security into everything, from your phone to the data center. And then as we've added, we've moved into it. We had to add our cloud story. We had to work with our services teams. We've worked with any of our development teams that are building, buying, or partnering to get a solution out the door, as well as enterprise. Our own data has to be taken care of. And what we've done is, when we looked at privacy engineering, it can be easily put on top of that secure development lifecycle. Design, plan, design, develop, verify, and then if we're running it, either we launch it out so it goes onto a customer's on-prem, or we put it into the operational part of what we do, and we have a whole set of requirements in that space. The nice thing about data is that it fits in that world. The bad thing about data, it's not limited to that world. And it's really important that now, especially when we start looking at AI and ML and data lakes, that data, where it used to live within our WebEx or within a routing software, can now be taken out and looked at and used differently. And that's where I've had to teach my engineers to think outside their, quote, box. They work really hard to understand that they need an ownership of not just the product, but of their data, especially when we're processing it.
So Steve, Lisa just hit on three very important related topics. Data lakes, ML, and AI. I'm going to take them in reverse order, because I think you start with the data lake and then you build up from there. Could your business necessarily, now that we're doing cloud, now that we're doing advanced analytics for a variety of topics, right? For not just security but performance, is built on that concept of the data lake. How has that transformed the way that you and your team think about the design ground up of our products?
Well, so first off, when we talk about Citrix Cloud, the original premise of Citrix Cloud is it stores very little data. All of you are worried about running your apps and desktops, and traditionally people do that in their own data center. They own the infrastructure, the delivery controllers, everything, as well as the servers running those applications. So we started by offering services where you could take some of the infrastructure and run it in the cloud, but can keep your applications right where they are. And I get questions constantly about how can you all work at companies that have their own security and privacy policies, and how can I trust you with all this data? And we often get down to real brass tacks where we have to really draw it out. Well, what data are you worried you're trusting me with? Because I don't know anything. We're not copying your directory. I don't have your passwords. It's really a command and control infrastructure for efficiently running a XenApp farm. It doesn't know about your users. It doesn't know about your apps. So you start from that base of the thing that makes it easier for me to sell to my customers is making sure that I know nothing as a base going in position. And we take that position very seriously. Then though we say, now I can add value in places if you do choose to give me more data. And not really give it to me, but let me process it on your behalf is a better way to say that. And so as we plug these services into the Citrix Analytics framework, and that Citrix Analytics framework includes this data lake, you opt in to particular kinds of services. And that's going to take particular kinds of metadata out of your system and get them stored so that we can help you process that and help make it actionable.
So one thing, I know you and I have worked on this together, and it's become a pretty consistent theme across our teams. We've started to build these data governance documents, right? We describe all of the metadata that we have access to. We describe where our POPs, where our various opportunities around the world to store that data are. What has that done? Has that helped with your sales cycle? Does that make a difference to the trust equation, the way that customers think about what they're doing?
So I'd say it's required, but not always sufficient. I'd say that a lot of the decisions that people make on these are first-order emotional decisions of, that's scary, I'm not ready to go there yet. And people need to be in a position where they're wanting that new value that you can bring to them, where they're willing to explore, okay, what risk am I at to take that on? And then what you get into is like, let's get out the documentation, let's look at what's moving, what's being stored where, and who has access to it. And you start to work through that. And as we see people go through cloud transformations, these are the same questions that people ask when they're buying Salesforce or Concur, or it doesn't have to be an artificial intelligence solution. It's anywhere that they're going to be taking their data and storing it, their employees' data, their customers' data. They have serious, real questions about that. So the ability to have really clear documentation about that you have access to and that your teams can explain to people, that's a base going in condition.
And you mentioned another item, and I'm going to ask each of you about this. Steve, you framed it in terms of people being able to make granular control decisions. Talk about that. Talk about how that gets built into the product. Talk about how important that is to customers in their decision making.
Well, I think people don't just want to know what types of data are being shared. They need to know. They're obligated to know, right? On behalf of their company, on behalf of their customers, on behalf of their employees. And so I don't think people want to be able to inspect every packet, but they want to know what classes of data are being moved, where they're being stored, how they're being stored, and who has access to that for what reasons. So it's not so much that I need to know, kind of the status of every field, but it's, what classes of information are being stored and processed, and why do you need that, and how are you using it?
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we see exactly the same thing. I mean, because when it really comes down to it, it's a risk decision of what you're doing with your data. And the more information you have in making that risk decision, the better it is for someone to know that, yes, I can trust you to take care of me because you're being very transparent about what you're doing. You're not going to do something I'm not comfortable with. And if you are, you're open to hearing what I need you to hear. And so what we've done is the same concept. We put out what we call our privacy data sheets and the flow of where data is going so that it can be seen as part of the decision making. And it's actually been done. We did some surveys out on privacy, and it really actually shrinks the decision making process for them. I mean, going from like months to weeks to days in some cases, because the other piece of it, many of you come and ask us about it even before we did data sheets, and we had to go, where is that data? Who's got this information about what we're doing? And now that we have a nice consistent way of doing the inventory, the assessments, and building this transparency into it, we are now being consistent across the board. And again, that's part of what we've been focused on is our path to getting there.
So I'll just make a plug while Lisa mentions this. She mentioned the research that Cisco's put out. I guess it was about 2 months ago.
Yep.
You put out your annual privacy report,
Yep.
which goes into just this topic. Do you mind spending a moment on that?
Yeah, what we did was we talked to about 3,000 customers. They didn't know it was Cisco. We went through, that type of survey, but asking a couple of things. One is, how do you see yourself in the maturity model of taking care of data and privacy? And then what are the things that are slowing you down in this area? And then how does it affect your decision making? Because again, we know we have to use data. We don't get to just go hide it or lock it down. We want to use it, but we need to do it in a explicit risk decision making process. And that we were able to actually see and across the countries. In fact, India loved that they were #1 in maturity and from our thing. I mean, we got so much things it put into their marketing because they were like, "Yay, we win!" No, we're like, no, not really. But it's just been really interesting to see how this transition has gone from it being just a pure certification or regulation to truly being a value statement as part of the business. And I do think it's because of where we've been moving our processing to. I mean, again, I can trust that I have my flash drive, but as soon as I put it into the cloud, who's got access to it? Knowing that this is a secured and understand who I want to share it with, accessible in space, becomes a really important piece of the story.
So let's turn up the volume a little bit, right? This is the really scary slide. For those of you who were here at Synergy last year, we had Synergy, I guess it was about a week before the GDPR went into effect, right? And the GDPR marked, for us, I'm sure for Cisco, for many of you, it marked this transformative moment when privacy was no longer just a bit of, privacy is what you make of it, and you do some registrations with authorities, and then you worry about your works councils. It really became a very tangible item for all of us. It required, for I think the first time comprehensively across a large group of companies, the notion of accountability, right? That you had to trace data up and down the stack. You need to be in charge of your vendors. You needed to have auditable processes, and you needed to be transparent about what you're doing, right? You now start to see the California Consumer Privacy Act is coming online in January of 2020. Get ready, everybody. We have a Washington state law that's going into effect. We have Vermont and Maryland and the state of New York and a bunch of others that are considering privacy laws. And so a few things come out of that, and then I'll ask each of you about it. The first thing is, we're on stage talking about this, right? 5 years ago at Synergy or at Cisco Live, I don't think this would have been a topic, right? But we're on stage talking about this. But the second is it poses for our customers, for our communities, a unique set of challenges. So let me ask each of you about that. This move to privacy laws that are more accountability based, with a lot more controls that then flow all the way through to engineering and IT, has that help or hurt what you do and what we offer? Steve.
So I think one of the things that there being a set of regulations out there is that it actually, to some extent, gives people inside your company who care about data security and data privacy a platform to stand on. If your top level executives don't see a profit motive in it, in general, it would get ignored. And even if your top level executives don't understand the in and the out of GDPR, the California consumer, they're like, I have to deal with this. They can do the math very simply on the back of a napkin about how much it's going to cost them if they're not complying with GDPR. And now you have the point where, we pretty much hired Peter because GDPR was coming into perspective. We didn't have a privacy digital risk officer before, and the company decided that it needed one. And so it means that you get basically a level of attention there. Like below that, I think you're still very much in a place where you as customers need to make decisions about vendors that you think have the right cultures and the right behaviors that they're going to work with you on these things, because the laws are not specific enough and sophisticated enough or flexible enough to really enforce how individual companies actually handle their data.
I agree with Steve, and the big thing for us that we've had to, so that we can actually implement, is to take these whole 350 and build them into our policy. So, you know, in the sense that GDPR tends to be kind of that consistent highest bar, we've been able to establish that. But when I work with my teams, I don't go, you're GDPR now compliant or working. I go, you're our privacy policy compliant. And that allows us to change it up if something happens in the world tomorrow, so that we can continue to work with the framework that we have. Whereas if I make it just a GDPR thing, now that doesn't stop us that we had to do binding corporate rules and that we had to get a data protection officer. And we had a lot of programmatic things that we wrapped into our GDPR support, and we're not going to get rid of that. But we have taken that whole concept, and now, as my engineers, they hate for me to say this, but this is my source of truth. This is the policy that we work under, and that policy means these requirements, and these requirements mean this type of privacy-enhancing processes or technologies, as well as awareness. So we can walk it through that way.
One thing to add to that is, I'm based out of the Citrix office in California, and I do a lot of work with what's called the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And they asked a few of us to go to Sacramento, which is the capital of California, and talk to the legislature. Actually, turned out one of the things they were working on at the time was the California consumer, data protection regulations. But they'd actually asked us to come up and talk about IoT because they didn't understand it. And they wanted some people from the industry, so we went with a Stanford professor and a couple different people from commercial industry who had some experience, and we got a group of 30, Senate and Assembly staffers. And the first thing they said is, be very gentle. We're mostly English majors. We don't understand any of this stuff. And they meant it in the most genuine possible way. So you have to know who's writing these regulations. These are not privacy experts, they're not computer experts, they're not networking experts, they don't know what the word metadata means.
They're not even digital business decision makers.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just not in that space.
And so I think for the most part, I'd say that people like, the people that I met that day all had the best of intentions. They weren't corrupt politicians, they were just literally, we're trying to figure out the right thing to do for our constituents, and would you please help us understand this? But you're not in the position where you should be depending on those regulations to protect you. They're there to put this sort of minimum bar to put all of us on notice that we have to care about this.
Well, California had a unique circumstance, right? A guy by the name of Alistair McTaggart put together a state referendum, and it looked like it was going to pass, so the legislature had a week to consider a bill. So I don't envy their position. Let me ask you this. So we are at this moment where we've had the GDPR, we now have some tumult. We have all the states, we have the federal government of the US considering privacy law. We have countries around the world that have not had strong privacy laws in the past that are now passing ever more stringent laws or considering ever more stringent laws. I'm going to start with you, Lisa. What's the great opportunity, and what's the thing that could be on the horizon that just scares the living daylights out of you?
Well, let me do my scare first. My scare is that we're going to get to a point that they expect each of us to consent to every time we use a piece of data. And I want to be under legal basis. I want to be able to know this is your, and I believe AI, by the way, will help me know the white lines, the guardrails you want to live in. I don't want to have to ask every time, because the customer experience, okay, let me just be honest. None of you guys have ever read your privacy notices every time. If you have, it takes 72 hours of reading privacy notices for us normal people in the workspace. Nobody's reading them. So me going through and consenting, you're going to either go yes, 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 or you're going to say I'm not sharing anything. Like my dad would never share anything. So it was, one of the two. I don't want to live in that world. I want consent to be needed when it's needed, but legal basis with contracts, with public interest, these things need to be well understood and used. So that's my scare, is that we're going to get, because it's a great term, it's going to get dropped into the requirements of the law and work in that. The other piece of it that I'm most excited about is that as we get to know what type of data we have, and we understand, quote, who owns it or who's stewarding it and who's taking care of it, we really see that value, and we start seeing all these interesting things that you could do with that data that would make each of us healthier or happier or have more money, or whatever it is that success means to you.
Is that what you're promising to everybody in this room?
All of you, yeah. If you do your data well, no. But I just really believe that it's that future for data. I believe that's where we are. We're in the data age now. We're in that information age, and it's an area that. When I started, I told Peter this. I grew up in North Carolina on a dirt road with my family. I learned about privacy very early because my family, the 4 houses, had we had a party line, and my grandma picked up the phone for every call. So you had to be really careful about your privacy and what you said. I also grew up where there was no data. The closest library was 17 miles away, and we had 3 TV stations, and one of them was not NBC. I mean, it was that kind of stuff when people told me, oh, have you seen that show? Nope, never. So that we have the access to all this data and that we can use it to our betterment, I'm so excited. I mean, that's why I think privacy is so important, and that's why I think data protection is so important, but it's also the AI and the ML, that you can pull a lot of information and maybe make this amazing again. It's not that it's not already amazing, but make it more amazing. So, sorry, I'll get on my soapbox. I have to shut down.
So, I'll tell you my biggest fear of this from a sort of regulatory point of view is I'm not even going to be nationalist about it. I'm just going to divide it into the countries that are forward-thinking and good about this, people who respect things like freedom, and then there are countries that I worry about. And I think, bottom line, artificial intelligence is going to be the biggest disruptor in everything, and that goes from commercial productivity to military and defense ever. And I'm including nuclear weapons and everything else in that. And the reason I say this is when you think about how fast this space is about to start to move. I did my first work in AI in the 90s, and we did some stuff that was kind of cool, but at the end of the day, we just didn't have enough computing power to solve the problems we wanted to solve. 10 years ago when I was at SYN, we were working on a project building one of the largest supercomputers in the world. We built the 64,000 core supercomputer for the University of Texas. It was called Ranger at the University of Texas. And it was one of the first petaflop class machines. Less than 10 years later, I just saw a machine came online, and it's measured in exaflops. So people will tell you Moore's law is slowing down. It's not. It's slowing down on one very fixed vector about how fast you can run a single thread inside a piece of silicon. Things like GPUs, my daughter was Bitcoin mining in my garage last year. She had more flops in my garage than that supercomputer that cost $50 million at the University of Texas. So this is coming, and this is very real. My car drives me to work every day now. So what I'm worried about is we do something where some politicians with the best of intentions create some restrictions about how we use artificial intelligence and how we develop it that puts the free world at an anti-competitive risk, and that we wind up with other parts of the world developing this faster than we do. So I do think that we need to put a lot of guardrails around this, and we all need to be conscious of this, and we've got to be looking hard at it, but fundamentally, we have to be running hard at this, because this is the technology of the century.
So I'll use the chair's prerogative, and I'll give mine as well. My biggest fear at this point, and it's a bit of a riff on what Steve was saying, is we have these incredible opportunities in front of us. We have so many good uses we can make of data and of metadata. We can advance healthcare. We can do internet-connected machines that not only help with healthcare, but then can push data sets to create ever faster solutions to health problems. We can deal with anti-fraud, anti-money laundering, with trade in arms. We can deal with security of networks and security of data. The fear is that the laws will come along trying to solve a very limited problem, right? Data brokerage and social media. And we will all wind up in that space. Here's my hope, and I think it may be an antidote to it, and it's something that Steve and Lisa were talking about earlier, which is, for the first time, I think in the last 18 months, we all have on the tips of our tongues, it's sort of a new expression, but it's now in wide use, privacy-enhancing technologies. We have the ability, right, and this is something you do in designing products, this is something you do in overseeing products, we have the ability to give people more granular choice. When you give people more information, you give them more granular choice, life isn't so scary anymore, right? And that, in a way, brings us home to trust. And I think really that is where, if you look at the binding thread between our companies, if I may, it's in that trust equation. So, Lisa, if you wouldn't mind speaking a moment about your trust equation with customers, that would be great.
Exactly. Our trust.cisco.com site, which is what you're seeing here, covers our whole thing of security and trust. So it talks about how we put security into our product set. It talks about what we did for GDPR. It talks about these data sheets that I referenced earlier. But really, what was important to us about this is that we start looking at this holistically, that we don't have these pieces and parts. And that was how we started with security, and that's how we're stretching our data, is to look at it across the board. And so it's there. If you have any questions, you can ask good questions there or catch up with me, because both ways is, we're really excited about the trust piece of this, and that's where we think privacy and data protection really fits in the trusting part.
And I'll close by saying we've done much the same. We, for those of you who have not seen it, go out, take a look for the Citrix Trust Center. We've put all of our product and service, not just the documentation for the products and services, but the specific security documentation, privacy policies, compliance documentation, certifications. We have places to report issues and incidents. We have a special news channel on there for things that are coming out involving our products and services. And it is part of the entire trust relationship that we're trying to create with our customers. So with that, I would like to thank both of you very much. This has been wonderful, and I appreciate you taking part.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
So we have 1 minute and 57 seconds. We have time for one question. Does anyone have a question? No, okay. Oh, yes.
So do you think in 50 years, people will look at the way we live today and say, wow, these guys were putting everything on Facebook and Google. They were idiots. They were crazy. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think eventually we'll get there?
So I'm going to answer it a little bit of a different way, and I'll let you guys add your thoughts. I think 50 years from now, all of the devices that are connected to us are going to do it for us. I think we're going to probably move a little bit further in that direction. It's going to be more curated. We're going to have the ability to make more choices about how it works. We're going to get a little bit smarter about the data that we put out there, but I think this is a train that's down a track.
I think the difference is going to be, we're all going to be putting a lot of data in the cloud. They're going to be aghast that we let Facebook own the data that we gave them.
Yep, I think that's the place too. And I do think if you watch all the training that our children are getting about being more specific, I mean, we kind of allowed people, Facebook grew up with no rules. And it started with people who were younger who thought it's okay to tell everything. But as you're bringing up more and more of this digital native child, they're being told, don't give away all of your information. It doesn't stop some people, but again, That's their decision. That's the important part of this, is that when we do collaboration and we do social media, we have to understand we have the right to put it up there. We also have the responsibility.
Terrific. Thank you all very much for coming. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.